Hello everyone, I'm Forrest McFreelava, and this is Ethics of Victoria 2, number 5C. We kind of skipped from 3 to 5, so don't be worried that that one's missing. I should probably relabel the other one. Hopefully that's done by now. At any rate, this is the Good Confederacy. We've already freed our slaves, we haven't colonized anywhere, we've stayed at peace except for when our allies have called us into war. We're going to, and we already have, it looks like, stopped taxing our poor, taxing only the rich, and I guess the middle class to some extent, and basically just trying to give everyone as good of a life as we can. Now, we are also not researching anything right now, which we should probably step into really quickly. And let's see, we already have all of the industry techs, not all the culture, almost all of the commerce. We will go ahead and get this last commerce tech, roll into industry, and then at the very end worry about our army. Now, worrying about our army, though, is a fairly significant thing for us right now. We don't have very many brigades, quite frankly. The United States has a solid 135. So they definitely outman us quite a bit in the battlefield, and that is going to be terribly problematic. We don't have anywhere near enough forces to really stand against them. At least not currently. So what we're going to have to do to stay alive is we're going to have to be kind of clever. Yeah, we'll go with clever as probably the best word for it, with how we use our military force. And one of the ways we're going to be clever about it is, in fact, we'll actually just kind of keep all these armies merged together. We are going to split our armies up in such a way that most of our infantry is just made up of our reserves, because the only war we'll realistically find ourselves in are, well, really a war against the United States that basically risks the life or death of the Confederacy. So that's what we have to look forward to, and we don't really have very many troops to actually actively deal with that. So what we will do is we'll stage the 3 armies that we have pretty much grouped together, which we'll actually just reform all of these and see what we end up with in the end. Because we basically have 2 coherent army groups. We also have some irregulars that we can use to just kind of encircle American forces that we can't disband because they're undermanned. So that's really the idea, is any infantry group that is undermanned, we will keep within our military. All of our army groups that are not undermanned, and we will actually spend some money on our military, which is something we've been avoiding for quite some time, but we will actually deal with that now, since we will need soldiers quite a bit. Alright, so, what was I saying? Anyway, all of these fully manned irregulars, we're just going to disband, and we will replace them with other units. Only the undermanned infantry is infantry that we'll keep, simply because if we get rid of it, we can't get it back. And let's see, we could probably move one of these pieces of artillery over to this far area, although it might actually just be better to have it here, since that group is more likely to come under attack. Because presumably the United States is going to have to occupy these provinces, then this province, and then move into Atlanta. So we want the majority of our forces here in Roanoke, since they're the most likely to be hit, and hit first and hardest. Alright, so we'll actually get phenomenalism. We'll get that and then roll through these techs. They're not really all that important, so we maybe should just get military techs first and foremost. And we will tax our rich a little bit higher. Let's see, what is our tax rate? I'm worried that we might not be taxing nearly as effectively as we could be, because we have had our administrative budget pretty low. Let's see, we'll go ahead and let our people become a little bit more socialist. Maybe that'll spread some reforms. Oh, I completely forgot that we were trying to actually answer those based on what was, I guess, more appropriate for our country if we are being good, as we have been claiming to be. Oh, and it looks like we actually have this entire army down here, so that's very helpful. We might just combine these 2 groups and split them up into a new force. Voting fraud. Okay, let's see. A major instance of voting fraud has occurred in an election for a local assembly in one of our states. We have every reason to believe that the vote was actually a majority victory for local conservatives, but the Liberal Party have nevertheless declared victory. Stepping in from a national level to correct these frauds is what is expected of us, and securing the conservative victory would reduce overall militancy in the area. But then again, maybe the Liberals would be better to have in power. Well, the Conservatives did win fair and square, so we will give the election to them. And let's take a look at this. All of these groups we could disband and just replace with really just mobilized poor if it comes to it. Hopefully it won't, but we should probably be better safe than sorry for that sort of thing. We will go ahead, and that's a pretty decent split, at least for the moment. And that group has quite a few dragoons, but that shouldn't be a problem. And there we go. This final group will just kind of stay back in reserves. And in fact, can we put them there? Yeah, we could actually put them in Roanoke as well. That really floods them with dragoons, which isn't really a great thing. So we'll take a dragoon out and put it over here. Other than that, though, we have our 3 mountain passes secure. And we'll just rally our forces behind the mountains and then try to maintain something of a coherent defense against the United States once that's accomplished. We will tax our people a little bit more, and that does seem to be working, keeping us out of a deficit. We'll go ahead and get machine gun armaments and just start working through our army techs, and that'll hopefully keep us alive as a country. So let's go ahead and disband these 5 infantry. And the armies that we're going to build after this, first of all, we should probably build ourselves 3 engineers if we're capable of actually constructing those. Then 3 groups of dragoons, 6 groups of artillery, and then just another group of dragoons and artillery. And we should actually probably have some engineers with them, but we'll build those later. Alright, now our people are moving into Charleston and Austin. We'll just have that go to Charleston and just get everyone rallied right there. And that'll be the go-to. We may, in fact, want to build up our forts just to slow down an American invasion, but I don't want to spend too much of our time and energy worrying about a potential attack. The important thing really is that we're going to have our army set up so that it can be rapidly brought up to a great amount of strength. And let's take a look. A strike today in one of our states initiated by communist troublemakers and revolutionaries was swiftly put down by police. The event has caused a massive backlash against the socialist movement in the state, as local farmers and peasants perceive the red ideology as being vehemently opposed to the traditions and histories of civilization in general, and the CSA more importantly. Well, let's hope that it'll either be the end or encourage socialism. So I think this is the one that we ignored previously. Well, we don't really want to make our people too socialistic, but we do want to pass some of the reforms. And that will just make people militant, which we're not really looking to do, although it doesn't seem like we really have that much risk of rebellion. So, since we're in a calm situation, we probably should wonder about the plight of the workers just a little bit. Looking at army construction, we're still buying tons of supplies. So that's going to be costing us quite a bit of money, putting us a little bit into a deficit, but hopefully nothing too serious. I'll go ahead and just keep researching these army techs. We should get a good amount through fairly quickly. We are encouraging clerks just throughout a large portion of the country. I wonder what our percent population is of clergymen. 2.7, 2.3, 2.5, 2.3, 2.2. Now I have heard, and I'm not entirely sure the accuracy of this, but I have heard that anywhere up to 3% clergymen is actually ideal. It's between 2 and 3 that you really want to be at. Now, I couldn't really say for sure if that's accurate. I do feel as though I've tested it once and found out that it does work somewhat, although I might just be speaking nonsense right now. Honestly, I couldn't say with any great degree of certainty. At any rate, we've got the engineers into these various armies, so they're basically as powerful as they need to be. They're just terribly undermanned. And it looks like that infantry group is now fully manned, which is great. And we're just going to actually leave them how they are. And it'll be an army 30,000 strong. We might actually just move one of these artilleries up there into that army. And that'll be a pretty solid defense. Oh, looks like we do have rebels. And in fact, oh, by the way, I just finished recording the time-lapse bit. Let's not actually resign. But that does mean I do have to reset the defaults. Because we weren't getting any messages. So it isn't that the world was just not having anything happen. It was that we weren't seeing any of it. Which is somewhat more worrying, perhaps. Alright, can we form any alliances with anybody? They do not want to. And alright, they're just not going to do that. Okay, so the Russians won't. The Germans won't. The Japanese won't. They really won't. Oh, and they dislike us slightly, so we will increase relations with them. The Italians also won't, nor will the French, and nor will the Spanish. So we're basically just going to be allies of the UK. And maybe, well, we're not in their sphere. The US has influenced us 100%, but they haven't added us, I presume, because that would prevent them from declaring war on us if it ever came to that. We will go defeat that rebellion, American Pan-Nationalists, not really something we want to encourage. And we did manage to defeat them, so now we'll just roll on back. Let's see, we will start giving our people health care. They actually want pensions more than health care. They want a lot of things more. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and say that at this point we're going to value human life above the electorate's concerns. Oh, I don't really know how justifiable that is. Alright, let's see. May Day Parade. Well, I mean, they're not doing anything illegal, so we will support their right. Alright, so maybe I shouldn't actually do that. In the future, we will probably just stick more to what the people want than any other thing. Because really, who are we to say for our people that they should have health care if that's not what they want? I mean, this is a democracy, right? That's the whole point. So we won't do that anymore. These armies will go ahead and split into their composite elements, which is just going to be, at large, just a dragoon and 2 artillery per various army group. So we'll just split those up. Now, with time, that'll hopefully be able to get cleaned up a little bit more. We will try to add, we will try to add engineers to them, and at any rate, we're going to end up with a just absolutely much larger amount of fielded brigades just from our mobilized corps, no matter what we end up doing. So there's no real point worrying so much about that. Let's take a look at our economy. It looks like our projects are still going through fairly rapidly, so we're not taxing the rich too much. And our population is going upwards, and actually going upwards relatively quickly. We are still going to be pacifists because we're not going to be declaring any wars on anybody. The United States is getting a ton of immigrants compared to us, but we are doing decent in that regard. We can pass another reform, and this time I'll stop taking ideas away, or I'll stop ignoring the people, and we will go ahead and get a 10-hour workday. And hopefully that won't end up destroying the economy. Although it does look like some of our factories are closing down. But actually it looks like they're just finding a new equilibrium. So our laissez-faire economics do seem to be working out to some degree. And that's all good. No research selected. We will go ahead and get deep defense systems. We won't worry too much about being secularized. As, you know, people do want religion and stuff. So there's actually a very interesting argument which I've changed my mind about quite a bit, but let's look at labor unions right now. Hell no, we won't go. One of our states has seen a surge in socialist agitation during the past few months since the forming of a labor union at one of the local workshops. The workshop seems to have set a local example for two other workplaces, and now labor appears to be organizing at every mill, workshop, and factory in the entire state. The government has been approached by a group of concerned members of the local elite who call upon the central government to dispatch National Guard units to the province in order to ensure that order is maintained. Well, we are not going to turn our soldiers against our people, especially if all they're doing is negotiating in an organized manner. I mean, that's not illegal, I presume. I mean, we actually did legalize trade unions, so it is definitely not illegal in our state at this time. Conservatives and reactionaries have managed to form a winning coalition once again, so they do manage to maintain control over the government, and in the ideal sort of sense, what we're going to do is have a conservative government manage to just kind of squeak by on apparently a very thin margin of the vote, thanks to the support of the reactionaries. So we can get our socialists up to like 39% and hopefully not have any terrible results. On September 25th, we'll be able to pass another reform if that's what the people demand, and who knows, it may very well be. Some of our states aren't doing very well factory-wise, but it looks like a lot of them are. And that's probably something we can just sort of ignore, and it doesn't look like our people are so upset that it did cause any sort of concern. So we can probably just keep going forward. And let's see if we can build any more military units. We can actually build a few. And let's see, we'll get this one last army tech. We'll ignore the navy for now. We don't really need to focus on it all that much. And, yeah. Whoops. Alright, so we're in a pretty good spot. I'm not sure how likely it is that we'll get above rank 10, and we will actually unpause the game while we look at this. Population-wise, the US has 44 million people. We are at a, a respectable 17. Let's go ahead and pass a reform. The voters would love low minimum wages, so we'll go ahead and increase their minimum wages to low. And that did seem to give us a little bit more tax revenue. The middle class aren't doing entirely well. Let's see, it's the artisans. You'd think they would be doing better. We will just entirely stop taxing the poor, although that actually did do a bit worse for our economy than I had thought it would. But that should help the poor out quite a bit. We will tax the rich at, let's say, 45%. That is pretty high, but we will use that and we'll increase our administrative budget. 92% is good. It's passing. It is really taking a toll on the wealthy, although they are maintaining their job of keeping everybody employed in factories that work. So who knows? Maybe things are going okay. And let's see. I'm not really sure if we're actually getting any more tax income. Tax efficiency is up to 60%, so maybe we are. Effective tax rate's only 27%, and that's not very high, all things considered. We will go ahead and get experimental psychology and just roll through that. And we do have a decent amount of money, so it's not like it really matters too much if we miss a dime here or there. Although, I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a deficit just constantly ongoing, but, same thing on a national scale. So we will just keep creating these little outline units, and we will pretty much have armies that are not optimally effective because they will be a little too much predominantly made up of infantry once we call all of our reserve brigades. Oh wow, we actually can all of a sudden get 108 brigades if we mobilize our poor. So, wow. Alright, debtors' prison. As the 19th century dawned on Europe, the practice of jailing people who defaulted on their debts was still the norm. In England, infamous examples of such institutions include London's Fleet Prison. In those institutions, debtors were not seldom expected to pay for both board and room, and sometimes even special jailers' fees. To effectively pay their jailers for their upkeep, oftentimes these practices only serve to further complicate the debtor's financial situation, as it, for natural reasons, is hard to earn money from inside a prison wall. The system was gradually abandoned in most European countries throughout the 19th century, and London's Fleet Prison was torn down in 1846, so they have quite a bit of time ahead of us. A wrongly jailed Confederate aristocrat is now drawing public attention to these institutions, calling for their abolishment. Well, it definitely does deserve due consideration, especially if it's being corrupt, as we don't really want to put people in some sort of awful corrupt prison that just, takes life and liberty from them over a long period of time and essentially makes them slaves when we just got rid of slavery. That'd be pretty awkward. So yeah, we'll go ahead and not do that. What was I going to speak about? We'll get psychoanalysis. A professor criticizes voting system. A professor at one of our most prestigious universities has published a tract on political philosophy. The tract argues in favor of a variant of the Jefferson method for appointing representatives to the upper house. What do we have right now? We have first past the post, and that's been doing pretty well for our country so far, although, looking into the 21st century, maybe not so well. Alright, let's see. Where was I, though? Jefferson method is a highest averages method, and the purpose of it is to allocate seats in proportion to the number of votes a particular party list has received, by maintaining the ratio of votes received to seats allocated as close as possible. The tract has received a fair amount of both national and international attention. The publication gives us a window of opportunity to try to reform our voting system, but we could perhaps be content with some international prestige on account of the publication instead. What is the government's position? Okay, so we can make our people slightly more into that idea, or we could not, and just take the prestige. So, is first past the post super evil? Taking a look at our upper house, it does lean a bit more conservative than it rightly should, although that is because we passed a reform and that turns people conservative. Honestly, we've been passing a lot of reforms and people aren't militant at all, so I don't think that we really need the reform, and we will take the prestige. It's not that much prestige, but I don't think that it's wrong for us to take it. Interestingly enough, I heard an argument about gerrymandering recently, which is, it's fun. Apparently, gerrymandered districts are popular for the people inside those districts because they're designed so that the majority of the people in the district get the politician representing them that they support. And that's kind of the thing, is not equitably either. I guess more fair, the more fair a district is, the larger percent of people are likely to be upset by the outcome. Because if 50% of people lean one way and 50% lean the other way, and it's just a toss-up, either way 50% of people are upset. Whereas if one district is, say, 70% leaning one way and 30% leaning the other, then always those 70% of people will be happy with the results. So it's pretty interesting. I mean, I guess it makes the argument that, insofar as you're able to, we'll go ahead and make our people less militant, because militancy is never a civil response, we'll say. And it's amazing, by the way, just how amazingly we're doing at keeping the people content. We could probably stop passing reforms entirely, and it turns out, because we don't tax the poor, no one's really upset at our government. And I mean, we are actually passing reforms pretty consistently and pretty coherently. What was I going on about just then? Oh, but anyway, so I guess the ultimate in ideal voting systems would see... I guess actually now I'm making an argument for the Jefferson method, where, if you get 33.9% of the people's votes, you would get 33.9% in the upper house. So I guess actually proportional representation would be better. It's just that gerrymandering, although not ideal, does have that one weirdly positive side effect, we'll call it. We will go ahead and not get integral rail system. Instead, we'll save up and then just rush into anti-rationalism. And then we will probably go after military directionism, just because it is important for us to get gas attack and gas defense from an absolutely pragmatic standpoint. Although, there we go with that absolutely pragmatic sort of talk. Let's see, people don't want pensions. What do they want, actually? They want trinket safety. Go ahead and give people some safety regulations. They're pretty stoked on that, understandably. Alright, so should we actually get gas defense and gas attack? Well, okay, so it's really morally wrong to use chemical weapons on people. I don't think that's a hard argument to make. However, it's also pretty morally wrong to let your people suffer from being attacked with chemical weapons. And that's really the choice you have to make in this game. If we do research chemical weapons, then every single time there's a rebellion, our people will intrinsically use chemical weapons against domestic rebellion. There's no way you can turn that off in this game, and that's arguably pretty morally despicable. Now, the alternative to that is if we fight, say, the United States of America, and we don't have chemical weapons, then we don't get chemical weapon defense. And then our people will just die completely pointlessly. And at that point, if we don't get chemical weapons, then we may as well just disband the army entirely and just straight up say, you know, if push comes to shove, we don't want to defend our nation. We would rather be part of the United States than fight. But if we decide that, then, I mean, this whole country exists for no reason, you know? I mean, if we decide that we would rather, you know, be subjects to them than fight, then we should never have had the Civil War to begin with. So I think maybe we should get defense against gas attack, and through that also intrinsically we should get gas attack. It's not exactly a pretty solution or a very great one, although it might be a necessary one, and it looks like we're having a bit of difficulty with our canned food industry. And that's not great. Canned food and glass, mainly glass. Glass is really not doing well right now. Although it is hiring some people, it is losing a lot of others. So, yeah. Do we get defense against gas attack? I mean, we're probably not going to fight the United States. At least that's definitely been the hope. Okay, what we're going to do is we're not going to rush it. We're not going to go out of our way to be able to use gas attacks against people and go out of our way to defend ourselves against other people's gas attacks. Now, we have had very good luck, in fact, a surprising degree of luck, not getting conquered by the United States throughout this entire campaign. And, you know, that's amazing. Hopefully it'll keep up, I suppose. And we'll go ahead and get the integral rail system now, and then from there we'll move into just other economic technologies, and only once everything else has been done will we go to military and go down that chemical weapons route. And I suppose we could make the argument that it's a deterrent, in a way, much in the way that nuclear weapons are largely a deterrent. Only one nation has used nuclear weapons militarily, and that was, of course, the United States. So, yeah, and several have them. The UK, France, Russia, India, and Pakistan, maybe Israel, who knows? And I'm sure there's someone else, because that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the US, oh, China, of course. Actually, I thought there was 9, but I can't really think of them, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Maybe Israel makes it maybe 8. Oh, North Korea for sure. Okay, yeah, so that's 9 if we go by that, but Israel's kind of on the fence about whether or not they want to say they have nuclear weapons. So who's to say? At any rate, we're definitely really just blowing past all the other forms of the Confederacy in form of chronology, since it's already 1901, and I don't think the others have made it to the turn of the century just yet. And we're definitely not a great power, even still. Let's see. Workers in a machine shop in one of our states have gone out in strike, protesting all manner of ills, real or perceived, in society as a whole and in the workplace. What is infinitely worse than a few redbeards taking a few days off, however, is that many other workers from all across the state have joined them in a statewide sympathy strike, causing the production engine of the state to grind more or less to a more or less immediate halt. Harsh methods might have to be employed to resolve this little situation. Okay, so time is on our side. Wait them out with vague promises but little or no action, or curtail local press distribution for any paper suspected of collaboration. Well, they do have a right to free speech, but I don't like the thought of lying to them. So hopefully our vague promises aren't entirely lies, and we can... Well, I mean, they're probably white lies then, and... I've heard an interesting quote, which is actually from Lawrence of Arabia, about white lies, which goes, or not white lies, it's half lies. So we would be telling half lies to our people, and the quote is, a man who lies merely hides the truth. A man who tells half lies has forgotten where he's put it. If I didn't, like, stutter in the middle of that, that would have probably been pretty cool. So, sorry about that. That probably took a little bit of the gravitas away. Take a sip of water, and that should hopefully help out. But, yeah, so we're doing fairly well. I imagine the people are fairly happy. I mean, they haven't been revolting, and we aren't taxing any of the poor. The rich seem to be maintaining their burdens fairly well, keeping the factories running, except in North Carolina, where they're not doing too great. Although everywhere else in our country, they are. We will stop encouraging craftsmen in North Carolina, or clerks in North Carolina, because, you know, it's not really doing all that hot right now. Instead, we'll go and encourage them in Alabama, since it does have a pretty decent number of factory workers. Oh, and we can pass another reform. The voters would love an 8-hour workday, so we'll give them that. Now, another interesting point is... And this is one that we should maybe consider more before I make claims like we should follow the will of the electorate for passing reforms. Only 8% of the people wanted the last reform we did. Oh, and this is the same one as the last one. We will not turn the arms of our soldiers. Not the last one, but one of the previous ones. Alright, so what was I about to say? And we are actually getting a decent amount of brigades ready to go. We will never really be able to match the United States straight up, I don't believe. But we are actually getting pretty close. So when we do mobilize our reserves, we should be capable of defending ourselves, although they do have a massive number as well. We will go ahead and encourage free trade, since we are already a fairly free trading nation. Okay, but back to what I was saying. We only had about 8% of the population demanding that we pass a certain reform. This last case being 8-hour workdays. So, what gives that priority over healthcare? I mean, the people haven't been saying, oh, we want, you know, an administration and a national defense. That's not really something they elect people over. So you could make the argument that it's kind of... Okay, I mean, so obviously this isn't exactly... I mean, okay, so this entire point throughout the entire series has been that it's not really, you know, my own personal beliefs, but what should we do for this country given the situation at hand? And I feel as though, you know, being essentially some sort of... being as we are in charge of the fate of the peoples of the Confederacy, it's better for them to be able to live. I mean, I guess you could make the argument, presuming I'm not actually sure what the Confederates took from the U.S. Constitution and all that, and the Bill of Rights and Declaration of Independence, but the whole idea of the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, it's right in there, isn't it, if you look at it like that? The right to life. Well, can you really have the right to life if you don't have the right to, I guess, be aided in staying alive? Arguably, you could. But I guess just as arguably, it's a bit difficult to say. So, okay, now here's the real rub of this, is I want to pass healthcare so that we get a larger population growth. Straight up, that's the whole thing. Like, it's not really a big moral question, although it is, because that's how we're framing this. But ultimately, the reform that I personally want to pass the most is healthcare. I want the highest healthcare rating we can have so that our population grows the most rapidly that it can, and we're the most powerful state that we could be. That's the real argument, and I'll pause the game. So that's the real argument for it. Other things, I mean, okay, so we can increase the minimum wage, which everyone wants, and that would really help the poor out. Now, if we were to abstract into the real world, we could say that if the poor had money and the government wasn't subsidizing healthcare, then because of that, they would be able to afford their own. However, that's looking too far into this game, where the only real effect is going to be a greater population growth. Now, I want that badly, but it really isn't the will of the electorate, although the electorate only 11% wants that, whereas, 0.58% of the population wants healthcare. And however, if we do pass this, then it will upset people who want old age security, minimum wage movements, and campaign for safer working conditions. They will become upset. If we pass this reform, it doesn't upset anybody because it is the most popular reform. So I'm going to go ahead and stick to the old thing, and perhaps that's perhaps if I'm going to I guess be overly kind to myself, we'll say that that's a sticking to principle rather than a pragmatic choice. And I am going to give myself that little bit of credit, because it was a weirdly difficult decision to make, honestly. And I find that actually pretty fascinating, because I didn't expect that it would be so hard. Alright, at any rate, our army is pretty well together. We will try to keep our forces back as much as we can. Just out of terrible, terrible fear of being invaded by the United States. And it is, 1902, the turn of the century has come and gone. The British are the second great power in the world, behind the Germans. The United States, I'm sure they're very sad about it, are the third greatest power. Let's see, we have a whole bunch of technologies we can research. Our economy isn't doing particularly amazing. We will go ahead and get education efficiency, though, just to keep our people literate and having a good time, as they should. Alright, our economy is taking a bit of a downward spiral, or at least it appears to. North Carolina is pretty much collapsing economically, which is not ideal whatsoever. We are, however, discovering new technologies, and that's pretty cool. I believe North Carolina was the one that was collapsing earlier anyway, and it looks like we're just having a bit of difficulty gathering the electric gear that our people want to actually be able to build some of these things. Demonstration turned sour. Screams can be heard from a workplace in one of our states where socialist agitators have turned an ongoing labor conflict from bad to worst. Local capitalists are appalled at the liberties these revolutionaries allow themselves with regard to how and when and where they preach their revolutionary ideology, and are considering forming a citizen guard should the situation escalate further. Okay, well, we're definitely not going to recommend that, and I do remember answering that previously, so we'll just keep answering that in the same way. We won't recommend that they form their own protection rackets, because obviously that's, let's just say, constitutionally sketchy. Presumably even so in the Confederacy. At least it's morally sketchy. If they want to do that on their own, then they're more than welcome to, but not with our support. Alright, what's going on with our capitalists? Are they so hindered right now? Let's look at all... Oh, okay, we'll actually only look at the capitalists. Stop forming protection rackets. Alright, so our capitalists are, of course, entirely capitalists. And they're doing amazingly well, actually. Some of them aren't getting entirely all their luxury needs, and some of them are worried about when they're old. But other than that, they're having a swell old time with life, and they're not getting all of their everyday needs met, and why not? Because luxury clothes are hard to get in the Confederacy. Huh. Interesting. What luxury needs aren't they getting? Basically any of them. Well... These guys are getting all of them, though, I guess. Interesting. Alright, so yeah, luxury clothes. I guess in a way we're pretty egalitarian in that no one, I guess collectively, no one can afford that. Although we are, hopefully once we get more prestige, we'll be more able to do those sorts of things. We will go ahead and get mass politics that will unlock the police state and fascism, but I don't think we're really going to have to worry about any of those real negative consequences of it. Or we could focus more on economics. So we'll focus more on economics. We'll start with industry and then go into commerce, and then after that we'll worry about the rest of culture, and then finally army. Oh, looks like Mexico's having some anarcho-rebellions. Tisk tisk. We haven't had rebellions for a few months, so we can tut-tut them a little bit. Although that's perhaps not the most moral thing to do. So I've actually been reading Dostoevsky recently. I know it's a real tangent, but it ties in this really vague sort of way. In that, Dostoevsky was an ardent Orthodox Christian and kind of wrote a bit of morality into his plays, as, a moral person presumably plays, I say, into his books. But it's interesting because, man, I totally forget where I was going with that. Well, it is interesting. Oh, okay, it was because Mexico was doing poorly right then and had a rebellion. There's the thought, and I don't actually know if this is Dostoevsky or if I'm just thinking of Dostoevsky, but there's a thought that goes, a good person shouldn't focus on stopping evil. Instead of focusing on stopping evil, their focus needs to be on doing their own good. And we're actually going to disband these two irregulars and go ahead and build up another engineer. Alright, but yes, the idea is that instead of focusing on preventing evil, you should focus on setting a good example. And that's kind of what led to the creation of this series. At least for this one portion where we're a peaceful confederacy. And it's a very interesting idea because, the obvious thought is, well, what if someone evil is doing something terrible nearby? And, the obvious thing that you could draw from that is, well, then things are going to get pretty bad. And that's true. That's entirely true. And there's no easy solution to that. And I guess the big part of that sort of outlook is that sucks, man. Like, that sucks a lot. But you should still not intervene. You should just try to set a good example. And then if you really want to take it to the point where it's really hard to take it, you get into ideas like, oh god, the British. Alright, well, we're in their war. We are losing money quite rapidly all of a sudden, which sucks because we were just able to start funding things we hadn't previously been able to. We maybe we'll be able to get through this without doing too much. We'll stop researching industry and we will go ahead and increase our tax efficiency, and hopefully we won't have to raise taxes on the middle class or the poor. And hopefully war doesn't really mess up our economy in any terrible way. Alright, let's look. We're fighting the Spanish and then Dutch, and it looks like the Germans are helping us, so this should be a pretty quick war. International solidarity, we're not going to say that they're, the worst versions of the people they could be. And there we go, we're already at peace again, and that brought the economy back up. Hopefully our factories had enough reserves that they were able to stay in business. Alright, so, okay, so here's the thing, man. So this is where that philosophy gets super difficult. Is not only do you not stop evil when you see it, but... So, I mean, that's kind of already something we're taking into consideration, because if we were going to stop evil wherever we saw it, then any regime that we decided, by whatever criteria we ourselves had, would have been evil. We would have gone and tried to fight. And that's obviously, the attitude of that Confederacy of Occupation, is going out and fighting evil wherever we see it. You could make the argument. So the idea is you don't go out and fight evil. Instead, you fight evil internally. Our civilization could be less evil, so we will fight the evil at home, and by our shining example, which I say that right as we potentially become a great power, so that's actually pretty cool. But through our potentially better example, we, convince the world to act in a better way. And the bit that makes this a really difficult philosophy and honestly one that I hesitate to even say just because I feel like it might be taken as a bit ridiculous, is the idea that if someone is treating you poorly, to ask what you are doing that makes that so. Which, you know, the obvious place that you go to if someone says that, and, you know, rightfully so, is, well, what about people who are just, you know, outright cruel? You know, people who are just cruel, monstrous people who are just out there to harm people, including you, for no good reason. And the attitude to that is honestly a pretty mean one in a way, in a pretty straightforward way actually. And it basically says, well, if you were so good, if you were as good as you possibly could be, then as soon as that evil person did any evil unto you, they would collapse in the shame of having done that and repent. And that, by the way, I mean, if that works, then my God, that's amazing, you know? So that's basically a hard thing to say. Let's see, what's this? A strike in one of our states initiated by communist troublemakers and revolutionaries was swiftly put down by local police. The event caused a massive backlash. Oh, okay, so this is that one. Alright, we'll still worry about the people, since, once again, they're not too angry, so that was really just a, we shouldn't judge the movement which has some legitimate grievances based on the actions of some people who went too far. We'll say that, and that, I think, is a good philosophy to live by. Okay, but anyway, so the idea from that novel is then, you know, don't ever feel as though anything bad that happens is out of your control in a sort of way. Or really, I guess the basic idea is, oh man, this is going to be hard to articulate. I might have gone a little bit out on a limb. The idea is that you should always look to better yourself and not look out at the world negatively. Because if you look out at the world as the thing that's broken, you'll quickly find yourself powerless to change it. Because as we are all people, we are all fairly weak when it comes to changing the world. But we are at our most powerful when it comes to changing ourselves. And so, it's not to say that people are not evil, because everyone has in them the capacity for evil. And, okay, I'm getting my footing on this now. And that's the big thing, and that's, you know, the fall of man, is the idea that because people can recognize good and evil, they're the only things that can act evilly, or truly that can act good. Because, you know, we know what hurts us, and we know what makes us feel good. And so you can go out into the world and treat other people either in a way that would hurt them, or in a way that would be good for them. You know, within boundaries, because it's hard and no one really knows what's good for themselves or for other people. Because it's difficult, and it's, you know, a bunch of crazy stuff. But, yeah, so with that in mind, always try to see the fault within yourself and not within the world. And that will help you, just generally. Okay, so the trustee system, and ooh, I feel like this is going to be a difficult one. The trustee system, or trustee system, was a correction system originated in the U.S. state of Mississippi, which we do have. So let's see, what is Mississippi up to these days? But also employed in Alabama, Texas, Louisiana, and others. Okay, so basically the Confederacy. Under which prison convicts with a record of good behavior, often equated with obedience, were allowed to police other prison inmates in a strict pseudo-military hierarchy of power, with some inmates deemed especially trustworthy, even being allowed to carry firearms. For profit, convict labor was a cornerstone of the system. The trustee system was first employed on the Parchman Farm prison in Mississippi, and was, as the 19th century turned into the 20th century, much lauded as a profitable and modern corrections system. Reports of widespread inmate abuses would end the system in the 1970s, but in 1906, It was all the rage in certain Confederate states. Okay, so this all sounds rather dreary, is not really a coherent response, and the whip cracks out of love is pretty messed up, man. So, I mean, this really doesn't say anything about, you know, getting rid of forced prison labor. It just says, do we stop prisoners from being able to take care of other prisoners and really rise up in the ranks? So I'm going to make the argument that was almost certainly made to get this legislation passed in the first place, and that's the argument that if these people are showing themselves to be reformed, then we should give them the opportunity to advance themselves socially. As, you know, social mobility is really a pretty key thing. Now, it does say that we'll get the trustee system, and I'm not really... Well, okay, so we'll either get the trustee system, and that'll make our economy slightly better, but piss people off a little bit, or we won't get it, and that'll just kind of make people a little more, well, I guess pissed off, just immediately. So many implications behind this one choice, because obviously, okay, pragmatically I would want that because it will help us pass further reforms and give us a better economy. However, it is kind of messed up in a vague way that isn't really articulated besides a slight increase in militancy and consciousness. But, and I mean, we are told that the system eventually basically just turns into something terrible, although any system that goes on long enough does tend to decay and turn into kind of like a more, I guess, perverse version of itself. So it is entirely possible that this would start off as a good system, and it would provide that sort of mobility for those people. I'm going to go ahead and not do it, though. We'll take the wide stance that says if we don't do that, then perhaps our convicts won't be used for forced labor. Or, who's really to say? This isn't HPM, so we don't have the option to determine what sort of policy we have for our prisoners. HPM allows you to do things like relocate them, or have them work, or have them be rehabilitated. This doesn't have that, so we are just going to have to play it by ear, but I did decide ultimately that, you know, the more vague option where we just don't have them do some weird pseudo-military thing for the rest of their lives, or at least for the rest of their sentences, is presumably better. We will let people have full citizenship these days. That seems like it's probably morally virtuous, or at least more virtuous than whatever we have been doing, which hasn't really been the most swell thing. Also, you may have noticed that we broke away from just making these 12 stacks, and oh, it looks like the Statue of Liberty has been created, which I believe is going to give the United States just an absolute overwhelming majority of immigrants. And you can already see their numbers spiking a little bit. So that's not cool for us all that much, but we are still getting a decent amount, and we shouldn't look towards our neighbor enviously. If anything, we should look to them as an ideal that we can emulate. Hey. So there we go. I'm getting the hang of this doing the right thing sort of attitude in Victoria 2. What I was going to say about our army is that we made 3 army groups that are fully just prepared, and those will be the buffer basically against the world, of course just meaning the United States. And we will go ahead and spend some money on forts just because we have some money to spare. Maybe we should be using that as like tax breaks for the rich, and that's really all we could use it as, since we have everyone else, you know, getting all the money they could use or need or anything like that. Let's see, do we build more armies or do we build more shells? Because right now we have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 shell armies, and we'll get 145 brigades. We do need to have at least enough forces that we can defend our country's borders well enough that we won't just die. And that's a pretty important thing. So we will in fact build up a whole new army, and we will in fact even add well, we don't really need a guard unit because regular infantry has better defense and we are probably going to be more of a defensive power, basically just for all time. In fact, you could make the argument that we should make armies almost entirely out of engineers, but I'm not going to make that argument. And we'll get some artillery, and then just a couple dragoons, and that'll be good. We'll try to modernize our army as much as we can when the time comes, and really just focus on being as effective as we could possibly be. The United States is getting a whole lot of forces on our border, so we're going to preemptively start spending money on this, since that is pretty horrifying, actually. Or maybe they're not. Okay, maybe I misread that. We will give ourselves a little bit of a stockpile, and we'll start worrying about our soldiers a little tiny bit more, just because in that moment it really did look as though they were preparing an invasion or something along those lines. Oh, did we give them military access? What? I mean, I suppose we must have. What? They're not our sphere owner. They are definitely putting a large amount of troops on the border, though. And they're not at war. Alright, we'll definitely fund our army. Vigilance is the price of freedom, they say. Kind of worrying. They do seem to just be, you know, chilling there. Oh wow, they're really there. I'm going to mobilize. It might be... Oh wait. Okay, they're not in the crisis. I don't want to be mobilized for too long. We will... Oh man, they have so many troops on the border. It really seems as though they're preparing to invade. We'll start splitting these groups up. We'll try to split them up into groups of, that's close enough, whatever. See, I just don't want the country to be destroyed, is the thing. If we decide not to act, and it kills us, then it doesn't matter. None of our moral decisions. There we go, they declared war. Alright, we're taxing everybody. Oh, thank God the UK, yeah, okay, so the UK did join us. And we're not a great power yet, so it isn't a great war. Alright, well, so we're only 3 minutes away from an hour. We're clearly not going to be able to fight this war in that time. We can probably defend the capital. Oh God, we're going to have to hold on, man. They're trying to annex us straightforward. There's no ifs, ands, or buts on that. We're not a great power yet. We might overtake the Spanish. We might not. In fact, we probably won't. If we do, this will become a great war. I sure hope Canada... Well, Canada's not going to join, so that's unfortunate. They don't really have very many men, so I guess it's not the worst thing. Oh, crap. Okay, well, we're going to have to make sure that our armies don't run into American military forces. We're going to have to fight a defensive war. We're going to have a lot of the West occupied. That's almost guaranteed. We might be able to form something of a defense in the forests, definitely on the mountains. We could push up to Huntington. You know, let's draw a battle plan. Thanks UK. That is maybe going to be our salvation. Alright, so what should we name this plan? Let's go ahead and just call it, well, National Survival. Alright, so the plan for National Survival. Pretty simple plan, I suppose. Immediately, it's going to rely on a defense of these mountains and of Richmond. So that covers most of the border, not all of it. We do just have plains and things, and even Richmond is in the plains, so it's not the most ideal. So potentially a good portion of the battle is going to be fought over Richmond. We'll try to defend that as much as we can. We will pull these forces wherever they come from, down and over, down and over, down and over. and try to form them all into some great siphon that'll just pluck up troops and bring them over here. Depending on how rapidly we can pull things off, we'll try to defend these forest sections. We won't maybe be able to go all the way down there. We'll definitely need to form some sort of defense over in this part of our countryside. The most initial defense will probably be right here at Valdosta, but we might be able to push up to Montgomery, and if we're in Montgomery, then we can go into Mobile, and lead a bit of a coherent defense, and that would actually block off our southern border, or I guess our southwestern border. The United States almost certainly has a bigger navy than we do, so we can expect to be blockaded. Yeah, we'll just try to mill our forces around, try to build up as much as we can behind the mountains and right here. Just build up as many forces as we can. We'll try to get something of a rear guard, but it'll probably be pretty scattered, at least for the beginning, and that is going to be the core region that we defend. I'll go ahead and surround it in a big blue line, and that will represent... let's actually select out real quick because I don't want to change the color on the line we've already built. Alright, so this big blue line, the thick blue line, will represent our defense against, I suppose, chaos, we'll call it. And we will just draw it all the way out, and I didn't mean to blur it like that, so we'll actually get rid of it and build a new one. So this will be the primary line of defense. And we'll see if we can't hold that section of our country. It's very sad for the people in the West, obviously, and if we could do this without sacrificing them, that would be far more ideal. Far more ideal. It would be the ideal if we could just defend our countrymen everywhere, although I don't believe that we can. So, that notwithstanding, we'll defend this one key area, try to beat back the Americans, and hopefully in time survive. I'm not sure what sort of war goals to demand. I'm not sure if we'll find ourselves in a position where we can demand anything. We might just be trying to survive. Previously, we haven't been demanding anything whatsoever. We might stick to that. It all remains to be seen. We might cut them down to size, although that is a bit of a stretch against what we have previously believed. It might be the most just thing to just accept a white peace if we are victorious. Yeah. So thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. We've definitely got an interesting time ahead of us. We have 67 brigades against the American 212, and they have not yet mobilized. So terrain is definitely going to be the most key factor, and we have not given ourselves gas defense. So, in fact, that could be the thing that we switch to in the beginning of the next episode. Maybe not. Maybe our idealism has led us to a cliff. That'll all remain to be seen. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Hopefully this experiment in goodness doesn't fall